My name is Elena Hartman, and I'm 32 years old. For the past decade, I've been the invisible backbone of my family's consulting firm, the person who makes sure every number adds up, every contract is airtight, every client relationship is maintained. I have a master's in finance from Boston University, a spotless professional record, and a reputation among our clients as the only person who truly understands their needs. But in my family, I'm just the support staff, the one who works behind the scenes while my younger brother takes the spotlight. My grandmother used to tell me that I inherited her work ethic and her attention to detail. She came to America from Prague with nothing but a suitcase and a dream, built a business from scratch, and taught me that success isn't about being the loudest voice in the room. It's about being the most reliable. I took that lesson to heart. Maybe too much. I never thought my mother would actually say the words out loud. I never imagined she would close the door in my face on Thanksgiving night, but she did. And that moment changed everything. It was the moment I stopped being invisible by choice and started becoming visible on my own terms. If this story hits home, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Every betrayal I share comes with a twist you won't see coming. The apple tart was still warm in my hands as I stood on the front steps of my mother's Beacon Hill brownstone. I had spent the entire previous evening making it from scratch, using my grandmother Magda's recipe, the one written in her careful handwriting on a yellowed index card that smelled faintly of cinnamon and old paper. The recipe called for Granny Smith apples, brown sugar, a hint of cardamom, and patience. Lots of patience. I had patience. I'd been practicing it my whole life. The tart had turned out perfectly this year. The lattice crust was golden and flaky, the apples tender but not mushy, the spices balanced just right. I'd even used the ceramic dish Grandma had given me years ago, the one with the blue floral pattern around the rim. Looking down at it through the dim streetlight, I felt a small surge of pride. This was something I had made with my own hands, following in my grandmother's footsteps. Surely this would mean something to my mother. Through the tall windows of the brownstone, I could see the warm glow of the chandelier, the flicker of candlelight on the dining room table, and the silhouettes of well-dressed people holding wine glasses. I recognized some of them, board members, potential investors, the kind of people my mother collected like rare coins. This year's Thanksgiving wasn't just a family dinner. It was a networking event, a carefully orchestrated performance designed to impress potential investors and business partners. My mother, Victoria Hartman, never did anything without a strategic purpose. I should have known better than to think I'd be welcome. I climbed the 3 stone steps and rang the doorbell, balancing the tart carefully in one hand. The autumn air was crisp and sharp, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and the distant aroma of roasting turkey from neighboring homes. I could hear laughter from inside, the clink of glasses, the murmur of sophisticated conversation. The door opened. My mother stood there in a tailored charcoal dress, her silver hair pulled back in an elegant chignon, pearl earrings catching the light. She looked polished, powerful, perfect. But her eyes, when they met mine, were cold. "Elena," she said. Not a greeting. Just an acknowledgement of my presence, the way you might acknowledge an unexpected delivery. "Hi, Mom. Happy Thanksgiving." I lifted the tart slightly. I made Grandma Magda's apple tart. I thought, "Elena, this isn't a good time." Her voice was crisp, professional. The same tone she used with vendors who called at inconvenient moments. "This is a professional dinner, and we need to keep the focus on Marcus and the business transition." The words hit me like a physical blow, but I kept my expression neutral. Years of practice had taught me how to hide what I was feeling. "I'm family. I work at the firm." I thought. "You work in operations?" she interrupted. "This dinner is about leadership, vision, and the future of Hartman and Associates. Marcus is taking on more responsibility, and we need the investors to see him as the face of the company. Your presence would complicate that narrative." Behind her, I could see my brother Marcus emerge from the living room, loosening his tie with the casual confidence of someone who had never questioned his place in the world. He was 29, 3 years younger than me, with our father's easy smile and our mother's gift for making everything sound more impressive than it actually was. "Hey, Elena," he said, his tone friendly but dismissive. "You can leave that in the kitchen if you want. The caterers have everything handled, though probably more desserts than we need already." I looked past both of them and saw my father, Robert, standing in the hallway near the stairs. Our eyes met for just a moment. I saw something flicker in his expression, guilt, maybe, or regret, but he didn't move. He didn't say anything. He simply looked away and disappeared into the study, leaving me standing there with my still warmed heart and my shattered expectations. "Mom," I said quietly, "I've been part of this company for 10 years. I manage every major client account. I handle all the compliance, all the financial analysis, and you do excellent work, Elena. No one is questioning that." She stepped slightly forward, closing the space between us, lowering her voice. "But tonight isn't about operations. It's about optics. Marcus needs to establish himself, and having you here it would raise questions we don't need to answer right now." "Questions about what?" "About who actually does the work." Something hardened in her eyes. "Elena, I don't have time for this. I have guests waiting. You can leave the tart or take it with you, but I need to get back inside." I stood there, holding my grandmother's recipe made manifest, still radiating warmth into the cold November evening. Inside that brownstone was everything I had worked for, everything I had sacrificed for, everything I had convinced myself mattered. My family, my place, my purpose. But I wasn't invited. "I understand," I heard myself say, my voice surprisingly steady. "I'll just leave this here." I set the tart down on the stone ledge beside a potted evergreen, the ceramic dish making a soft scraping sound against the cold surface. "Happy Thanksgiving, Mom." I turned and walked down the steps before she could say anything else. I didn't look back. I didn't let myself cry. I just walked to my car, got in, and sat there for a long moment with my hands on the steering wheel, watching my breath fog the windshield. My phone buzzed. A text from my grandmother Magda. "Are you there yet? How is everyone?" I stared at the message for a long time before I replied. "Change of plans. Can I come to your place instead?" Her response came immediately. "My door is always open for you, Milachku. I have soup waiting." I put the car in gear and pulled away from the curb, leaving behind the warm lights of my mother's house, the sounds of laughter and celebration, and whatever fragile illusion I had been holding on to about my place in that family. Grandmother Magda's apartment was everything my mother's brownstone was not. Where Victoria's home was all sharp angles and designer furniture and strategic lighting, Magda's place was soft, warm, lived in. The walls were covered with old family photographs in mismatched frames, shelves lined with Czech pottery and well-worn books, and the air always smelled like coffee and something baking. She opened the door before I even knocked, her weathered face creasing into a smile that reached her eyes. At 82, she moved more slowly than she used to, leaning on her cane, but her gaze was as sharp as ever. "Come in, Slatichko," she said, using the Czech endearment she'd called me since childhood. "You look cold." I stepped into the warmth of her small Cambridge apartment and finally, let myself feel everything I'd been holding back. The tears came hot and fast, and Magda simply pulled me into her arms and held me, the way she had when I was 7 and scraped my knee, the way she had when I was 17 and didn't get into my first choice college, the way she had at my father's goodbye dinner when my parents' marriage officially ended. "Sit," she said eventually, guiding me to the worn sofa. "I'll get the soup." While she moved about the small kitchen, I looked around at the familiar space. On the wall near the window was an old photograph from 1979. Magda in a business suit, standing in front of a small office with a hand-painted sign that read, "Hartman Consulting Services." She looked so young, so determined, so full of hope. She had built that business from nothing. A Czech immigrant who came to America with a degree that wasn't recognized here, she had worked as a secretary, then a bookkeeper, then finally a nonprofit financial consultant. By the time she was 45, she had a thriving practice helping charitable organizations manage their money more effectively. She had been a pioneer in a field that didn't even have a name yet. And then she had handed it all to my mother, Victoria, who had transformed it into something bigger, more prestigious, more profitable. Hartman and Associates now had 15 employees, millions in annual revenue, and a client list that included some of the most respected nonprofits in New England. But somewhere in that transformation, something essential had been lost. Magda returned with 2 bowls of soup, rich, savory, filled with vegetables and barley, and settled into her favorite chair. "Tell me," she said simply. So I did. I told her about standing on the steps with the apple tart, about my mother's cold dismissal, about Marcus smirking in the background, about my father's silent retreat. I told her everything, and she listened without interrupting, her dark eyes never leaving my face. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she set down her soup bowl and leaned forward. "Elena, I need to tell you something. Something I should have told you years ago." I looked up at her, surprised by the seriousness in her tone. "Your mother did the same thing to me," she said quietly. 30 years ago, when I was ready to retire and hand the business to her. She took my client lists, my methodologies, my relationships, everything I had built, and she rewrote the story. In her version, she was the visionary who had modernized my quaint little practice. She erased my name from the narrative and called it progress. I stared at her. "Grandma, I didn't know." "Of course you didn't. I let it happen. I told myself it didn't matter, that mothers are supposed to step aside for their daughters, that my legacy lived on even if my name didn't." She shook her head slowly. "But I was wrong, Milachku. I should have stood up for myself. I should have demanded recognition. Instead, I taught your mother that it was acceptable to take credit for other people's work. And now she's doing the same thing to you." She reached for my hand, her skin papery thin, but her grip surprisingly strong. "I see so much of myself in you, Elena. The way you work so hard without asking for anything in return. The way you convince yourself that being useful is the same as being valued. But I learned something too late that I want you to know now. You cannot love people into respecting you. You cannot work hard enough to earn basic human dignity. Those things should be given freely, or they're worthless." Her words cracked something open inside me. I had spent so many years telling myself that if I just worked a little harder, if I just proved myself a little more, my mother would finally see me. But Magda was right. I had been chasing something that was never going to come. The words settled over me like a heavy blanket. I thought about all the years I'd spent at Hartman and Associates, all the late nights fixing Marcus's mistakes, all the client crises I'd resolved, all the financial strategies I'd developed. I thought about the quarterly reports I prepared that Victoria presented as her own insights. I thought about the new compliance framework I'd built that had saved the company from a potentially devastating audit. And I thought about my name at the bottom of every document, in the smallest font, under operational support. "There's something else," I said slowly, the realization crystallizing as I spoke. "About 3 weeks ago, I got a weird email from our bank. Something about finalizing documentation for a line of credit. I thought it was spam at first, but then I looked more closely." Magda's expression sharpened. "What kind of line of credit?" "That's just it. I didn't know. So I called the bank, and they said they were processing a $2 million business expansion loan with my name as the guarantor." "Did you sign anything?" "No, nothing. I've never even heard about any expansion plans." I pulled out my phone and showed her the email chain I'd been saving. "Look at this signature page. That's supposed to be my signature, but I never signed it. Someone scanned an old signature of mine and pasted it onto the document." Magda took the phone, her hands trembling slightly, and studied the screen with the intensity of someone who had spent decades reviewing financial documents. Her lips pressed into a thin line. "This is fraud, Elena. This is a serious crime." I know, but it's my family. My mother and Marcus, they wouldn't actually. I stopped, hearing how hollow the words sounded even as I said them. Magda handed the phone back to me. Your mother did the same thing to me once. A much smaller amount, but the same principle. She needed capital for an expansion 25 years ago, and she used my credit without asking. When I confronted her, she said it was a family matter and that I should be grateful she was growing the business I had started. She paused. I never reported it. I told myself it was for the good of the company. But Elena, letting them get away with this won't protect the company. It will only teach them that they can do it again. My phone buzzed. A text from Kat Wu, one of my favorite clients, the executive director of a nonprofit called Community Bridges Coalition. Kat and I had worked together on a major financial restructuring last year that had saved her organization from bankruptcy. Hey, hope you're having a great Thanksgiving, Sui. Quick question. Marcus called me today about taking over our account. Did you leave the firm? Because if you did, we'd want to follow you wherever you go. I showed the text to Magda, and something shifted in her expression, a hint of satisfaction, maybe even pride. They know, she said softly. Your clients know who actually does the work. They know who they trust. But I can't just leave. Hartman and Associates is... It's everything I've worked for. No, Magda said firmly. It's everything you've worked for them. There's a difference. She reached over and took my hand. Milachku, you have a choice to make. You can keep accepting crumbs from their table, hoping that someday they'll see your value. Or you can build your own table. I sat there in the warm glow of her apartment, surrounded by the evidence of her own pioneer spirit, and felt something shift inside me. Not anger, exactly. Something colder. Something more dangerous. Clarity. Over the next 3 days, I barely slept. I spent hours combing through every file I had access to at Hartman and Associates, carefully documenting everything I found. And what I found was worse than I'd imagined. The $2 million loan was just the beginning. Over the past 18 months, my signature had been forged on at least 7 other documents. Vendor contracts, lease agreements, financial statements submitted to clients. Someone, and I was increasingly certain it was Marcus, with my mother's knowledge, had been systematically using my credentials, my reputation, and my credit to conduct business I knew nothing about. I found expense reports showing that Marcus had been billing personal expenses to client accounts and then covering them up with vague descriptions. I found emails between my mother and Marcus discussing how to manage Elena's involvement in upcoming projects, how to keep me busy with operational tasks while they handled strategic decisions. And I found something that made my blood run cold. A detailed business plan for Hartman and Associates 2 that explicitly positioned Marcus as the new CEO and completely eliminated my position. According to the timeline, they were planning to announce the reorganization in January, right after the new investor funding came through. The investor funding secured by the $2 million loan guaranteed by my credit. They were planning to use me as collateral and then discard me. I sat in my apartment at 3 a.m, spreadsheets open on my laptop, and felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel before. Pure, cold rage. Not the hot anger that burns out quickly, but the kind of anger that clarifies everything. The kind that shows you exactly what you need to do. For years, I had told myself that my mother's dismissiveness was just her management style, that Marcus's laziness was something I needed to compensate for as a good sister, that being overlooked was the price of being reliable. I had crafted elaborate justifications for why it was acceptable for me to work twice as hard for half the recognition. But sitting there in the dark, looking at the evidence of their betrayal laid out in black and white, I couldn't lie to myself anymore. This wasn't about different management styles or family dynamics. This was theft. This was fraud. This was a deliberate, calculated plan to use me up and throw me away. And I wasn't going to let it happen. I made copies of everything. I uploaded files to a secure cloud storage system that only I could access. I printed out key documents and stored them in a safety deposit box. And then I called my father. "Elena?" He sounded surprised. We hadn't spoken in months, despite living in the same city. "Is everything okay?" "No, Dad." "It's not. I need to show you something. Can you meet me tomorrow?" There was a long pause. "Is this about Thanksgiving?" "Because your mother explained that it was a business dinner, and it's about fraud, Dad. It's about someone forging my signature on loan documents. It's about criminal activity happening at the company. Can you meet me or not?" Another pause, longer this time. When he spoke again, his voice was different, older, wearier, but also more present than he'd sounded in years. "Tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock, the coffee shop on Brattle Street." "I'll be there." After I hung up, I texted Katwoo back. "I haven't left yet, but I might be soon. If I start my own practice, would you really consider switching?" Her response was immediate, in a heartbeat. "You saved our organization. Elena, Marcus can barely answer basic questions about our account. We trust you, not the Hartman name." I stared at that message for a long time. "We trust you, not the Hartman name." For 10 years, I had believed that my value came from being part of Hartman and Associates, from carrying the family legacy, from proving myself worthy of a place at their table. But Kat was right. The clients didn't care about the name. They cared about the work. They cared about results, expertise, and trust. All things I could provide on my own. I looked around my small apartment, the modest one-bedroom I'd been renting for 6 years because I'd been pouring all my money into retirement savings and paying off my student loans while Marcus drove a leased BMW and lived in a luxury condo my mother co-signed for. I looked at my bookshelves filled with finance textbooks and industry journals, at my desk covered with notes for client projects, at the framed photo of Grandma Magda on the wall, and I made a decision. The meeting with my father was awkward at first. We sat across from each other in the coffee shop, both of us holding oversized mugs and avoiding eye contact. Robert Hartman looked older than I remembered, grayer, more lined, wearing a casual fleece jacket that Victoria would have never allowed him to wear during their marriage. "I'm sorry about Thanksgiving," he said finally. "I should have said something. I should have stood up for you." "Yes," I agreed quietly. "You should have." He flinched but didn't argue. "What did you want to show me?" I pulled out the folder I'd prepared, a carefully organized collection of forged signatures, unauthorized loan documents, falsified expense reports, and email chains that clearly demonstrated a pattern of fraud and deception. I walked him through each piece of evidence methodically, the way I would present a financial analysis to a client. His face grew paler with each page. "My God," he whispered when I finished. "Elena, this is..." Victoria could go to prison for this. Marcus, too. "I know." "What are you going to do?" I looked at him directly. "I'm going to confront them. I'm going to demand that my name be removed from all these documents. I'm going to resign from the company, and I'm going to report the fraud to the appropriate authorities." "Elena," and I need to know, Dad, are you going to stand with me this time, or are you going to walk away again? The silence stretched between us. Through the window, I could see people hurrying past on the Cambridge street, wrapped in scarves and coats, carrying shopping bags and coffee cups, completely absorbed in their own lives. Normal people with normal family problems. "I'll stand with you," my father said finally. "I should have done it years ago. I'm sorry it took this long." 2 days later, armed with documented evidence and a new resolve, I walked into the Hartman and Associates conference room for what I knew would be my last time as an employee. My grandmother had wanted to come, but I'd asked her to wait. I needed to do this part myself. My mother and Marcus were already there, reviewing some paperwork spread across the polished mahogany table. When I entered, they looked up with expressions of mild annoyance, as if I were interrupting something important. "Elena," my mother said with forced patience. "We have a board meeting in 30 minutes. If this is about your role in the upcoming restructuring, we can schedule time next week to. Or this isn't about my role. I set my folder down on the table with a solid thump that made them both pause. This is about the $2 million loan you took out in my name without my consent. The room went very still. Marcus recovered first, his expression shifting to something between annoyance and dismissal. Oh, come on, Elena. You're listed as a senior associate at the firm. These kinds of financial arrangements are standard. We've always handled things as a family. Show me the document I signed authorizing this loan. Well, you didn't exactly sign a separate authorization, but your employment contract gives the company authority to. No, it doesn't. I've read my employment contract very carefully. In fact, I had an attorney review it last week. I opened the folder and pulled out the first set of documents. This is my forged signature on the loan guarantee. This is my forged signature on 3 vendor contracts. This is my forged signature on financial statements submitted to the Madison Foundation. And these are email chains between the two of you discussing how to manage my involvement while you plan to eliminate my position. I placed each document on the table, one after another, like playing cards in a game where I held all the aces. My mother's face remained impassive, but I saw her fingers tighten on her pen. Elena, you're overreacting. These are routine business matters. Sometimes in a family business, we take shortcuts on formalities, but forgery isn't a shortcut. Mother, it's a crime. Don't be dramatic, Marcus snapped. You're acting like we robbed you. We're growing the business. You should be grateful that you used my credit to secure funding for a restructuring plan that eliminates my job. I pulled out another document. This is your Hartman 2.0 proposal. Very thorough. Except you forgot to mention that the entire expansion is guaranteed by my personal credit rating, which you'll happily destroy if the business fails, while you and Mom protect yourselves with corporate liability shields. The door to the conference room opened. We all turned to see my grandmother Magda standing there, leaning on her cane, dressed in one of her good suits. Behind her was my father, looking uncomfortable but determined. Grandma, I said softly. I thought I asked you to. The moment I heard you were finally standing up for yourself, I couldn't possibly stay silent, Zlatichko. She moved into the room with slow dignity and took the seat directly across from my mother. Hello, Victoria. Mother, Victoria said tightly. This is a private business matter. Please don't interfere just because of family sentimentality. This isn't about sentiment, Magda replied calmly. This is about a business leader using her own daughter as a legal tool while planning to discard her. This is about fraud and betrayal. And this is about history repeating itself because I was too weak to stop you the first time. Marcus slammed his hand on the table. This is ridiculous. Mom didn't do anything wrong. I'm the one who handled the paperwork, and Elena's been involved in loan matters plenty of times. We just moved a little faster on the process this time because the opportunity was time-sensitive. You moved faster? I turned to face him fully. You forged my signature. You created false contracts. You caused loan delays with unauthorized spending. You diverted over $50 US in company funds to cover your personal expenses. And you call that moving faster? For the first time, Marcus looked genuinely rattled. Those were legitimate business expenses. Dinner at high-end restaurants with your girlfriend, weekend trips to New York that you billed as client development, a designer watch you categorized as professional materials. I pulled out the expense reports I'd documented. I have receipts for everything. Marcus. And I have emails where you discussed with Mom how to keep these expenses off Elena's radar. My mother stood abruptly. Enough. Elena, I understand you're upset about the Thanksgiving situation, but this is clearly an overreaction driven by hurt feelings. Everything we've done has been to protect and grow this company. Your credit was simply a means to that end. That's how business works? You still don't understand that, even after all these years? No, I said quietly. I understand it perfectly. I understand that you've built a business on my grandmother's foundation, taking credit for her vision. I understand that you've used my expertise for a decade while positioning Marcus as the talent. I understand that you've now attempted to use my credit and my reputation to fund an expansion that specifically eliminates me. I understand all of it. I paused, letting the weight of those words settle in the room. My mother's face had gone pale, and for the first time I could remember, she looked uncertain, vulnerable, even. What you don't understand, Mother, is that I'm not a tool for this company. I'm not a shadow. I'm not a convenient guarantee. I'm a person with my own value, my own expertise, and my own future. For 10 years, I gave you everything I had, hoping you would see me, but I finally realized that you never will. Not because I'm not good enough, but because you've convinced yourself that I exist to serve your vision, not to have one of my own. I closed the folder and picked it up. From now on, I will use my name by my own will, and I will build something that actually reflects what I'm worth. Silence fell over the conference room. My phone, lying on the table, buzzed with an incoming call. I glanced at the screen. Dr. Catherine Wu. Excuse me, I said, and answered. Cat, can I call you back in Elena, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but I just got off the phone with Harrison and Lowe Foundation. They're one of your other clients, right? They just called asking if the rumors were true that you were leaving Hartman. They said if you were starting your own practice, they wanted to be your first official client. She paused. I told them you were. Was I wrong? I looked at my mother's frozen expression, at Marcus's pale face, at my grandmother's encouraging smile, at my father's quiet nod. No, I said into the phone. You weren't wrong. Excellent. Because Community Bridges Coalition is ready to make it official too. We want to move our account to wherever you go. Send me the paperwork when you're ready. I ended the call and looked at my mother. That was Cat Wu. And apparently also Harrison and Lowe Foundation. They're both leaving Hartman and Associates to work with me exclusively. You don't tell me you're recording this conversation. Marcus's voice was sharp with panic. No, I said calmly. There's no need. I already have all the evidence I need. I picked up my folder and stood. My grandmother rose slowly to her feet as well, my father moving to offer his arm for support. You'll be receiving formal notice from my attorney within 48 hours, I continued. I'm demanding that my name be removed from all loan agreements immediately. I'm also demanding full accounting of where my performance bonuses for the past 3 years went, the ones specified in my employment contract that were never paid. And I'm reporting the forged signatures to both the bank and the state attorney general's office. Elena, my mother started, her composed facade finally cracking. I'm also resigning, effective immediately. I'll have my desk cleared by end of business today. Magda looked at my mother one last time. Victoria, you may have thought Elena was a useful child, but you never saw her as a trustworthy adult. That was your biggest mistake. Victoria said nothing. She simply stood there, her hands pressed flat against the conference table, watching as we walked toward the door. The sound of the door closing behind us was strangely quiet. Out in the hallway, away from the conference room, Magda gently took my hand. You did well, Milachku. Thank you, Grandma. For the first time, I could say those words from the bottom of my heart. For everything. My father cleared his throat awkwardly. Elena, I know I have a lot to make up for, but I want you to know I'm proud of you, and I'm here if you need anything. I looked at him, this man who had been absent for so much of my adult life, and saw genuine remorse and genuine hope in equal measure. I might need help moving my files out, and maybe we could get dinner sometime. Actually talk. His face brightened. I'd like that. The next 2 weeks were a blur of activity that felt both terrifying and exhilarating. I spent my days working from Magda's dining room table, surrounded by boxes of files I'd carefully removed from Hartman and Associates, responding to emails and phone calls from clients who had heard I was leaving. There were moments of pure panics. Late at night, lying awake in my apartment, I would think about what I had done. I had walked away from the only professional identity I'd ever known. I had severed ties with my family. I had reported my own mother to the authorities. What if I had made a terrible mistake? What if no one actually wanted to work with me without the Hartman name behind me? What if I failed? But then morning would come, and with it, another email from a client asking about my plans. Another call from someone who wanted to work with me specifically, not with the company. And slowly, I began to understand that my value had never been in the name on the door. It had been in the work I did, the relationships I built, the expertise I had spent a decade developing. Kat Wu became my unofficial partner in those early days, helping me draft business plans and reach out to contacts in the nonprofit sector. She had connections I didn't, and a fierce loyalty that I was still getting used to. More than that, she had a perspective that I desperately needed, someone who saw me as a peer, not a subordinate or a useful tool. "You saved community bridges when no one else could," she told me over coffee one morning. We were sitting in a small cafe near Cambridge Common, laptops open, working through the incorporation paperwork for the new business. "You saw problems our previous consultants missed. You created solutions that actually worked, and you treated our organization like it mattered. That's not something we forget." "I was just doing my job," I said, embarrassed by the praise. "No," Kat corrected me gently. "You were doing it better than anyone else could. There's a difference. And that's why people are following you, Elena. Not because of your last name or your family connections, but because you're genuinely excellent at what you do." Within 10 days of my resignation, 7 major clients had formally requested to move their accounts from Hartman and Associates to my new practice. I had named it Hartman Wu Consulting, honoring both my grandmother's legacy and Kat's partnership. We filed the incorporation paperwork on a Tuesday morning, working from Magma's kitchen table while she made traditional Czech kolaches and offered commentary on business strategy. "Don't undercharge," she advised, sliding a plate of pastries toward us. "Women always undercharge. Your expertise is worth top dollar. Charge it." She was right. When I finally sent out my first fee schedule, I set my rates 15% higher than what Hartman and Associates had been charging for my services. And not a single client balked. Meanwhile, the consequences at Hartman and Associates were unfolding exactly as I had predicted, and perhaps more dramatically than I had hoped. The bank, upon receiving my attorney's notice about the forged guarantees, launched an immediate internal investigation. Within days, they had frozen the $3 million line of credit and demanded a full audit of all loan-related documentation. When they discovered the irregularities in the expense reports and the shell vendor payments, they flagged the account for potential fraud. The board of directors at Hartman and Associates called an emergency meeting. My father, who still technically held a board seat despite his retirement, attended and shared some of what he'd learned. According to him, Victoria had tried to minimize the situation as a family misunderstanding, but the board members weren't buying it. They asked to see the business expansion plan, my father told me over the phone. When they realized that the entire strategy depended on eliminating you while using your credit as guarantee, several board members threatened to resign on the spot. They said it was unethical at best and potentially criminal at worst. What happened? Your mother stepped down as CEO. She's calling it a planned transition for health reasons, but everyone knows what it really is. Marcus is technically still employed, but he's been removed from all client-facing roles pending the investigation. I felt a complex swirl of emotions hearing that news: satisfaction, sadness, vindication, grief. These were still my family members, even if they had treated me terribly. Even if they had tried to use me and discard me. "Dad," I said quietly, "thank you for telling me, and thank you for showing up at the meeting." "I should have shown up years ago. Honey, I'm sorry I didn't." The local business press picked up the story about a week later. The headline in the Boston Business Journal read, "Hartman and Associates in turmoil as key clients depart amid leadership shakeup." The article didn't have all the details. I had been very careful about what information became public, but it noted that several long-term clients had chosen to follow a former senior associate to a new independent practice. Within days, I started getting calls from other nonprofits asking about my services. My calendar filled up with consultation requests. Kat and I had to start discussing hiring additional staff. And through it all, Grandma Magda was there, offering her dining room table as our temporary office, sharing stories from her own early days building the original business, reminding me that I was doing exactly what she had always hoped I would do. "You're not just building a business on Zlatichko," she told me one evening as we sat reviewing client contracts. "You're building integrity. That's rarer and more valuable than you know." 3 weeks after my resignation, I received a formal letter from the state attorney general's office acknowledging my complaint about the forged documents and informing me that they were opening an investigation into potential financial fraud at Hartman and Associates. The letter was businesslike and impersonal, but seeing it in print made everything real in a way that nothing else had. My mother and Marcus could face criminal charges. I sat with that knowledge for a long time, trying to understand what I felt. I wasn't gleeful. There was no satisfaction in the idea of my family members going to prison. But I also wasn't regretful. They had made their choices. They had used my name, my credit, my reputation without my consent. They had planned to benefit from my work and then discard me. The consequences they were facing now weren't my doing. They were the natural result of their own decisions. My father called me that same evening. "Elena, I know I don't have the right to ask this, but your mother is falling apart. She's been calling me, asking if I can convince you to drop the complaint with the Attorney General's office." "No. I understand. I had to ask." "She's still your mother." "She stopped being my mother the day she closed the door in my face at Thanksgiving," I said quietly. "She was my employer who committed fraud against me. That's the relationship we have now." "Fair enough." He sighed. "For what it's worth, I think you're doing the right thing. Someone needed to hold her accountable. I just wish I'd been brave enough to do it myself years ago." "It's not too late to be brave now, Dad." "I know. I'm working on it." 4 weeks after my resignation, something unexpected happened. Magda handed me an envelope that had arrived at her address, a handwritten note addressed to me, postmarked from Boston. I recognized my mother's handwriting immediately. "Elena, I won't insult you with excuses or apologies that would ring hollow. You know what I did, and you know why it was wrong. What I'm beginning to understand, too late, I realize, is how much you carried all these years. The weight of keeping the business running, of fixing problems I never acknowledged, of being invisible while others took credit for your work. I told myself I was building a legacy. But I was really just protecting my ego. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I wanted you to know that I'm starting to see you clearly for the first time. And I'm ashamed that it took losing everything to open my eyes. I hope someday I'll have the chance to say these words to you in person. But I understand if that day never comes. Your mother." I read the letter 3 times, looking for manipulation or justification or any hint of the controlling woman who had dismissed me on Thanksgiving. But all I found was something that looked like genuine remorse. "What will you do with it?" Magda asked gently. "Keep it," I said. "But I'm not ready to respond. Maybe not for a long time." "That's wise. Reconciliation, if it comes, should be on your terms, not hers." 3 months after that devastating Thanksgiving, I hosted my first official client dinner at the new office space Kat and I had leased in Cambridge. It wasn't large, just a renovated space overlooking the Charles River, with exposed brick and large windows that let in plenty of natural light, but it was ours. The dinner was simple. Italian food from a local restaurant, good wine, easy conversation. Around the table sat the people who had believed in me when my own family hadn't. Kat Wu, who had become my business partner and friend, representatives from Harrison and Lowe Foundation and 3 other major clients, my father, who had helped me move into the office and had been slowly, carefully rebuilding our relationship, and Grandma Magda, presiding over the gathering with quiet pride. "I want to propose a toast," my father said, standing with his wine glass. His voice was stronger than I'd heard it in years. "To Elena, who had the courage to walk away from everything familiar to build something true. And to Hartman Wu Consulting, which represents the best of what my mother-in-law started 45 years ago. Integrity, expertise, and genuine service." "To Elena," everyone echoed, raising their glasses. I felt tears prickle at my eyes, but these were good tears. Healing tears. As the dinner wound down and people began to leave, Kat pulled me aside. "I have something to tell you. I wasn't sure if I should mention it tonight, but..." I heard from a mutual contact that Marcus was let go from Hartman and Associates, officially for restructuring, but everyone knows it's because of the fraud investigation. I absorbed this news quietly. And my mother? Still facing potential criminal charges. The Attorney General hasn't made a final decision yet, but it's not looking good for her. I nodded slowly. Part of me, a small part, felt a twist of old family loyalty, the urge to somehow fix the situation. But I pushed it away. This wasn't my responsibility to fix. I had spent years trying to fix things for my family, and it had only taught them to take advantage of me. After everyone else had left, Magda and I sat together by the window, watching the lights reflect off the Charles River. The early February evening was cold and clear, and I could see my breath fog against the glass. "Are you happy, Milachku?" Magda asked. I thought about the question seriously. Was I happy? My family was fractured, possibly irreparably. My mother might go to prison. My brother's career was in ruins. The business my grandmother had built and my mother had expanded was now diminished and scandal-tainted. But I had something new. I had a business built on my own terms, with my own name, serving clients who valued my expertise. I had partnerships based on mutual respect rather than family obligation. I had my grandmother's pride and my father's slowly rebuilding relationship. I had work that fulfilled me and freedom that I'd never known before. "Yes," I said finally. "I think I am." Magma squeezed my hand. "Good. Because this..." She gestured around the office. "This is what I always hoped for you. Not the wealth or the prestige, but the freedom to be yourself. To use your gifts without having to hide them or apologize for them. I couldn't have done it without you." "You could have," she said firmly. "But I'm grateful I got to help." My phone buzzed with an incoming email. I glanced at it and felt my breath catch. It was from the Massachusetts Attorney General's office. The subject line read, "Case status update. Hartman and Associates investigation." I opened it with trembling fingers. "Ms. Hartman. This message is to inform you that our investigation into financial irregularities at Hartman and Associates has been completed. Based on the evidence you provided and additional documentation obtained through subpoena, we have determined that criminal charges are warranted against Victoria A., Hartman, and Marcus J. Hartman for fraud, forgery, and misappropriation of funds. Formal indictments will be issued within the next 30 days. We want to thank you for your cooperation in this investigation and for your courage in coming forward." I showed the email to Magma. She read it slowly, her expression thoughtful. "How do you feel?" she asked. "Sad," I admitted. "But also resolved. They made their choices. These are the consequences. That's a mature way to look at it. Your mother raised a better woman than she knew." We sat together in silence for a while longer, watching the river and the city lights. Somewhere out there, in her elegant brownstone that might soon need to be sold to pay legal fees, my mother was probably receiving similar news. Somewhere, Marcus was probably panicking about his future. But here, In this modest office that I had built with my own hands and my own reputation, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: peace. A few days later, on a quiet Sunday afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in months. I baked an apple tart using Grandma Magda's recipe. This time, though, I wasn't baking it for someone else's approval or someone else's Thanksgiving table. I was baking it for myself, for the simple pleasure of creating something with my own hands. When it came out of the oven, golden and fragrant and perfect, I cut myself a generous slice, made a cup of coffee, and sat in my apartment eating it slowly, savoring every bite. My phone rang. I saw my father's name on the screen and answered. "Hi, Dad." "Hi, honey. I hope I'm not interrupting. I just wanted to check in and see how you're doing with everything." "I'm okay. Actually, I'm good." "I'm glad." He paused. "Listen, I know this might not be the right time, but I wanted to ask. There's a small nonprofit I've been volunteering with, a literacy program for immigrant adults. They're looking for help with their financial systems, and I immediately thought of you. Would you be interested in taking them on as a client?" I smiled. "Send me their information. I'd be happy to talk with them." "Thank you, Elena, and not just for this. Thank you for giving me a second chance to be your father. Thank you for taking it." After we hung up, I finished my tart and looked around my apartment. It was modest, yes, but it was mine. Paid for with money I had earned honestly, filled with furniture I had chosen, decorated with photos of people who actually valued me. On my desk was a framed photo from the opening dinner at Hartman Wu Consulting. In it, Magda had her arm around me, both of us smiling at the camera. Behind us, you could see Kat and my father and all the clients who had believed in me enough to take a chance on my new business. I picked up the photo and studied it for a long moment. That woman in the picture, smiling, confident, surrounded by people who respected her, that was who I had always been. It had just taken me 32 years and a devastating rejection to finally see it. In the photo, I could see something else too. A lightness in my expression that had never been there in the old family photos from Hartman and Associates gatherings. In those pictures, I always looked tense, guarded, like I was bracing for impact. But in this new photo, I looked free. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from Kat. "Board meeting tomorrow at 9 a.m. Harrison and Lowe wants to expand their contract. Also, I found us a potential new hire, former CFO from a major nonprofit, looking for consulting work. Interested?" I typed back. "Definitely. See you tomorrow." Tomorrow. The word felt full of possibility in a way it never had before. Tomorrow I would go to my office, and meet with clients who valued my expertise. Tomorrow I would build something that mattered. Tomorrow I would continue writing my own story, in my own words, under my own name. I thought about that ceramic dish with the blue floral pattern, the one I had used to carry the apple tart to my mother's door. I had left it there on the steps that night, never bothering to go back and retrieve it. At the time, it had felt like losing something precious. But now I realized it was just a dish. Just a thing. What mattered wasn't the dish, or the recipe card, or any other physical object. What mattered was what Grandma Magda had given me. The courage to value myself, the wisdom to recognize when I was being used, and the strength to walk away from people who would never truly see me. Those gifts couldn't be left on anyone's doorstep. They were mine forever, woven into who I had become. I stood up from my desk and walked to the window, pressing my hand against the cool glass. Out there in the darkness, somewhere, my mother was probably lying awake too, thinking about everything she had lost. Her company, her reputation, her daughter. I felt a pang of something, not quite sympathy, not quite sadness. Just a recognition that we had both made choices, and those choices had consequences. She had chosen status over integrity, image over authenticity, control over connection. And now she was living with the results of those choices. I had chosen differently. I had chosen truth, even when it was painful. I had chosen my own worth, even when it meant losing everything familiar. I had chosen freedom, even when it was terrifying. And standing there in my modest apartment, looking out at a city full of infinite possibilities, I knew with absolute certainty that I had chosen correctly. Tomorrow would come, and with it, all the challenges of building something from scratch. There would be difficult clients and tight deadlines and moments when I doubted myself. There would be times when I missed the security of being part of something established, even if that something had never truly valued me. But there would also be joy, real joy, earned through honest work and authentic relationships. The joy of seeing my own name on my own business. The joy of making decisions that aligned with my values. The joy of finally living a life that was truly mine. I turned away from the window and got ready for bed. Tomorrow morning, I would wake up and do it all again, not for someone else's approval, but for my own satisfaction. Not to prove I was worthy of love, but simply because the work itself was worthwhile. And that, I was learning, made all the difference. The following week, on a cold but sunny February morning, I received one more letter. This one was from my mother's attorney, requesting a meeting to discuss potential resolution of outstanding matters. The tone was formal and cautious, carefully avoiding any admission of guilt while also clearly hoping to avoid a trial. I called my own attorney and we discussed the options. I could push for maximum criminal penalties. I could negotiate a settlement. I could agree to reduce charges in exchange for full restitution and a permanent separation from the business. "What do you want, Elena?" my attorney asked. I thought about that question for a long time. What did I want? Revenge? Justice? Reconciliation? Closure? "I want them to be held accountable," I said finally. "I want the truth to be on record. But I also want to be able to move forward without this hanging over me for years." "That's reasonable. We can work with that." In the end, we negotiated an agreement. Victoria and Marcus would plead guilty to fraud and forgery charges. They would pay substantial fines and make full restitution to me for the unauthorized use of my credit and the performance bonuses they had withheld. Victoria would be permanently barred from serving as an executive at any financial services firm. Marcus would serve 6 months of community service and probation. They would avoid prison, but they would carry the weight of their actions for the rest of their lives. When I signed the agreement, I felt a strange mixture of relief and melancholy. This was the final severing of the ties that had bound me to Hartman and Associates, to my mother's vision, to the role I had played for so many years. But it was also a new beginning. Spring came early to Boston that year. By late March, the trees along the Charles River were already budding, and the air had lost its bitter edge. Hartman Wu Consulting was thriving beyond my most optimistic projections. We had 12 clients, 2 full-time employees besides Kat and myself, and a waiting list of organizations hoping to work with us. On a particularly beautiful Saturday in April, I organized a small gathering at Grandma Magda's apartment. Just family, the family I was choosing to keep. My father came, bringing flowers. Kat came, bringing wine. And Magda presided over everything with the satisfaction of a woman whose legacy had finally been honored properly. We didn't talk about Victoria or Marcus or the legal proceedings. We talked about the future, about the literacy program my father had connected me with, about Kat's ideas for expanding our services, about Magda's memories of building her first business in a time when women entrepreneurs were even rarer than they were now. As the afternoon sun slanted through Magda's windows, painting everything in gold, my grandmother pulled me aside. "I have something for you," she said, and handed me a small wooden box I'd never seen before. Inside was a collection of old business cards, photographs, and documents from her original consulting practice. But underneath those, wrapped in tissue paper, was something else. A hand-embroidered bookmark with Czech text. "What does it say?" I asked. "Pravda a odvaha vedou ke svobodě," she read. "Truth and courage lead to freedom." I felt tears spring to my eyes. "Grandma, you showed both, Milachku." and now you're free. That's all I ever wanted for you." I hugged her then, this woman who had given me so much more than business advice or financial backing. She had given me permission to value myself, to demand respect, to build my own life on my own terms. Later that evening, after everyone had left and I was driving home through the spring twilight, I thought about where I had been a year ago, working endless hours for a family that didn't appreciate me, hoping for recognition that would never come, accepting crumbs and calling it loyalty. And I thought about where I was now, running my own business, building real partnerships, choosing my own path. The drive took me through the heart of Boston, past the neighborhoods I knew so well. I passed by Hartman and Associates' office building. The lights were on in only a few windows now, where once the entire building would have been blazing at this hour. I wondered briefly who was still there, what they were working on, whether they ever thought about the person who used to keep everything running smoothly. Then I kept driving. Past that building, past that life, towards something entirely my own. My mother had closed the door in my face on Thanksgiving, telling me I didn't belong at her table. At the time, it had felt like the worst moment of my life. The rejection had cut so deep I thought I might never recover from it. But now I could see it for what it really was. The moment I was finally set free. Free from the need to prove myself to people who would never truly see me. Free from the exhausting work of making myself smaller so others could feel bigger. Free from the lie I had been telling myself, that family loyalty meant accepting abuse with grace. I would never thank her for it. The pain she had caused was real, and her actions were inexcusable. The fraud, the manipulation, the years of taking credit for my work, none of that was justified, and I would never pretend otherwise. But I could acknowledge that sometimes the most devastating rejections become the catalyst for the most profound transformations. Sometimes being pushed out of a place you don't belong is the only way to find where you actually do. I drove home through streets that felt familiar, yet somehow new, past the brownstones of Beacon Hill, where I had once desperately wanted to belong, toward my own apartment where I belonged to no one but myself. The apartment was dark when I arrived, but I didn't mind. I turned on the lights, made myself a cup of tea, and sat by the window looking out at the city. My city. Not my mother's, not my family's, but mine. On my desk, I could see the outline of tomorrow's schedule already taking shape. A morning meeting with the literacy nonprofit my father had connected me with. Lunch with Kat to discuss hiring decisions. An afternoon call with a potential new client who had found me through a referral. Evening hours set aside for the financial analysis work I actually loved doing, the kind of deep analytical thinking that had always been my strength. Every item on that schedule was there because I had chosen it, because I had built it, because I had finally claimed the right to direct my own professional life. And for the first time in my life, that felt like enough. No, it felt like everything.